In this video, you will learn everything about ControlNet in ComfyUI, what ControlNet is, how it works, and you will get to know many preprocessors that allow you to create many cool images. On top of that, I will even give you my own ControlNet workflow at the end, with which you can easily get started right away. With that said, let's get to the first topic. What is ControlNet? ControlNet is a tool that lets you guide image generation by providing extra information. It looks at things like the pose, depth, and edges in an input image and uses that to influence the final generated image. This means you can use an existing image as a sort of template, and ControlNet will try to match certain characteristics from that image in the new one it creates. This is super handy for things like making sure a character's face looks consistent across different images or getting the pose you want. There are tons of ways you can use this, and I will show you a bunch of examples in this video. So let's get started right away. First of all, you need to download it, either manually from GitHub or via the manager. You can also use the missing nodes function in the manager if you get and download my workflow at the end of the video, which would of course be the fastest way. You also need the respective ControlNet models, which you can also download from GitHub and the manager, respectively. I have linked all the essential links in the description. If you are not sure how to download nodes and models or have no experience with ComfyUI at all, check out my beginner video. Once that's done, I will show you how to integrate ControlNet into your workflow and explain its nodes. First, you need the ControlNet load model node, which allows you to load the models you need for your preprocessors. We will get to those in a bit. Next, you need the apply ControlNet node advanced. This acts as the link to the sampler and applies the ControlNet to your image. Here you can adjust the strength of the ControlNet and when it should be applied to the image. We will delve into that shortly as well. The last ControlNet node you need is the all-in-one aux preprocessor. This allows you to load all the preprocessors without having to load them individually with their own nodes, keeping your workflow more organized. However, if you encounter errors with some preprocessors, it's best to use their dedicated nodes, as sometimes errors occur due to incorrect automatic settings. It is also crucial to connect the load image node with the preprocessor so it can extract the features of the image and pass them on. Once you have the nodes, connect them to the basic nodes. Just replicate what I am doing here in the video. If you are unfamiliar with the nodes, you can simply download my workflow where I have set everything up perfectly for you. I highly recommend watching my first ComfyUI video where every single node is explained in detail. Also, it is essential to note that you should avoid using models with XL in their name for image generation, as this will result in an error. I am unsure why this is the case, but I have read that they are incompatible. If any of you have more insight into this, please share it in the comments and I will pin it. Another important thing to understand is how the load model node and preprocessor node work together. For example, if you use depth as a preprocessor, you will also need the depth model. This applies to all other preprocessors as well. You will need the corresponding model for each. It is quite straightforward. Oh, and one more thing before we move on. The empty latent image is also missing from the workflow here. Okay, our ControlNet workflow is all set up. Before we dive into using it, I want to show you some of my favorite preprocessors. These are the ones I use all the time, and I think you will find them super helpful too. So let's take a look. Alright, so I have put together a list of the most important preprocessors, the ones I use all the time. This way, you can clearly see what features each one pulls from your input image. And remember, each preprocessor has its own unique effect on the final image. In this video, I will be showing you a few of my favorites, and we will really dive into how they work. Of course, I can't cover everything, so after the video, I really encourage you to experiment on your own. Trust me, playing around with ControlNet and seeing how it shapes your images is a lot of fun. And once you get the hang of it, you will be using it all the time to create even more amazing images, exactly the way you envision them. Okay, let's head back to our workflow. First up, I'm going to show you the depth preprocessor, or more specifically, the Midas Depth Map. As the name suggests, this preprocessor extracts a depth map from the image. As we have chosen a depth preprocessor, we need the depth model used by all depth preprocessors. It is important to note that there are different depth preprocessors, each with varying strengths and applications. But today, we're focusing on the Midas Depth Map because it works exceptionally well for landscapes. To demonstrate this preprocessor, I chose an image of palm trees on a beach as input and added a prompt at the top to create a similar image. I also set the ControlNet strength to 0.87. This way, the depth map is not completely copied from the input image, so the AI has some freedom to structure things itself. Remember, the higher the strength, the more closely the output will resemble the input image. Conversely, the lower the strength, the more freedom the AI has. It's pretty straightforward. I am going to use DreamShaper for image generation and pull a preview image node from the processor so you can see what it's doing. When I hit start, you can see that the preprocessor has extracted the depth map from the image. And another thing I have done is set it to generate multiple images, which I recommend you do as well. This gives you more options, as sometimes images are generated with errors. The images have been generated, and as you can see, they look very similar to our original image. Of course, We could have used an image generation model that creates more realistic images to make it look even more similar, but for our purposes this is sufficient. Here's another example with a mountain and the landscape in front of it. As you can see, it has also produced beautiful results here. As I said, you really need to play around to figure out the best settings and preprocessor for your specific generation needs. Now that you know what depth is, let's move on to the Canny Preprocessor. Okay, I have got something prepared for you here. I am using the Canny Edge preprocessor and the appropriate Canny model, of course, and I have set the strength to 0.75, and in the prompt I have asked it to generate images with the text in a retro cyberpunk style. For the input image, I have written Aris and pasted it in. As you can see, Canny takes the contours of this text and uses them to accurately replicate the text when generating images. I use Canny to add text to my images, for example to create logos, but as with all the preprocessors, you can tailor it to your own needs. You can get really creative as the possibilities are endless with these preprocessors. As you can see, it has now generated the images and they look fantastic. Of course, there are occasional glitches and we could increase the ControlNet strength for even better results, but overall it looks great. As I have already mentioned, we are not going to go into everything in this video. We are going to focus more on the basics. You can then dive into each of these areas and refine them further later. Here are some more cool generated logos featuring bread and crystal that I created. They are pretty awesome, right? You can have a lot of fun with this preprocessor and let your creativity run wild. Now let's move on to the next preprocessor, Openpose. I will show you this preprocessor using the finished workflow that I will give you at the end of the video. If you have seen my previous videos, you know how this workflow works with the upscalers afterward. So check out my last video about ComfyUI if you need a refresher. The only things that have been added are the ControlNet section at the bottom and the seed generator. You can find all the nodes again in the description or just download them using the missing nodes feature in the manager. But let's get back to the preprocessor. As you can see here, I have selected Openpose and its corresponding model. And for the input image, I have used this woman. Openpose will extract her human key points, things like her face, hands, posture, and so on, and apply them to my generated image. I have also adjusted the prompt and the image generation model accordingly. Now here's an important point about the Apply ControlNet node. You need to pay attention to when the ControlNet is applied for certain image generation models. If the value is incorrect, faces, hands, and other features can become overly deformed. You really need to play around with the strength of the ControlNet and when it's applied. For pictures with people, I recommend setting the final percentage value between 0.23 and 0.7. Now that we have everything set up, let's create an image. As you can see, the preprocessor has taken the human key points from the input image and passed them on. I made a few cuts in the video here as it generated some images that were not safe for work. But as you can see, the pose has been transferred to some of the images. As I said, you have to experiment with the values to get the result you want. For example, this is the result that I wanted to get and that I got after I generated it twice. Once you have your desired result, you can upscale it directly and insert it below. The upscaled version usually looks really great. You might need to refine the hands a bit, but I will probably show you that in another video. Here are a few other generated images with different input images. As you can see, you have the opportunity to be really creative here. It is also very useful. For example, I used it to create part of my thumbnail. When it comes to design, ControlNet is truly essential. Now let's take a look at another preprocessor, LineArt. It draws lines along the contours of the input image and passes them on. I find it's great for copying human poses and bringing a lot of the characteristics of the input image into your generated image. I use it when I'm generating comics, for example. I won't go into detail here now, so let us continue. You can find my workflow on Patreon in the ComfyUI document here, or on my Discord server in the AI Sources channel. I have linked both in the description below. So now we have actually reached the end of the video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe and check out my last ComfyUI tutorial. See you next time.